Hello and welcome to the Takeaway with Chicago Town, our live show on Ballsdotie, where we give our immediate reaction after every Ireland game in the Six Nations. And what a way to end it all, a 32-18 win for Ireland over England in the Aviva Stadium. Not many of us would have predicted such a comfortable win, if a win at all, for Ireland. So brilliant stuff. We're going to talk about all of that now. I'm delighted to say we're joined by a couple of great guests. Once again, first by Munster and Ireland legend, David Wallace. David, we spoke a couple of times earlier in the competition, and it wasn't as positive a start as this, but that's as good as we've seen from Ireland in a long time, isn't it?
That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think, no, as I said, none of us were really expecting the manner of that victory. You never go against Ireland, I think, when they're playing at home, but I think to be dominant for a large portion of that game, even when they went down to 14 men, even 13 men at one stage, they were still giving it socks. So, yeah, really, really, really positive way to finish off the campaign, and puts a very, very different gloss on everything.
It does, and we'll get into all that. But we're also getting the English perspective today. As you'll know, our second guest today is former England out half, and now the voice of the rugby pod, Andy Goode. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not great, guys. I'll be honest. After watching that for 80 minutes, it wasn't England's best performance. In fact, it was one of England's worst performances for quite some time. But I stand here I've got a humble pie cooking in the oven as well as the pizza. Yeah, fair play to Ireland. They dominated us and fully deserved a big victory.
You mentioned pizza. Of course, it wouldn't be the Takeaway with Chicago Town without some Chicago Town pizza. Perfect addition to any Six Nations game. Andy's got his in the oven, but me and Wally already had ours. We both went for the cheese stuffed crust loaded pepperoni for today's game. There's yours, actually, David, along with your prediction for the game, which, look, in fairness to you, you weren't that far off, and actually very close, really. 5 points off with England, 1 point, or 5 points off with Ireland, 1 point off with England, and more importantly, one of the very few people that predicted an Ireland win for today. What made you think that we had it in us, I suppose?
I'm kind of surprised that I was, to be honest, and I think I mentioned earlier. When Ireland are playing at home, you expect them to beat teams, no matter who they are. So I think, yeah, I'd always back Ireland. I suppose the main reason that this week was because, look, both teams have been a little bit stuttery coming into this game. But home advantage is massive, and I think England are right. They had a good showing against France, but have gone backwards since the World Cup. To put two matches back to back is sometimes difficult when you don't have that consistency or have that confidence. So I thought Ireland had maybe been unlucky in a couple of games. You think of that Welsh game, probably a little bit unlucky, and we're close against a really, really good French team. We didn't have the benefit of maybe home support that day either. But yeah, I thought Ireland were going to shade it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did more than shaded in the end, Andy. I mean, by the way, if you want to get your comments in, any questions for the lads, anything like that, you give in a chance of winning an Ireland jersey and some pizza vouchers. So please do that. We'll get to a lot of them later on the show. But Andy, on David's point there, Ireland did, they did more than shade it. It was never going to be an easy place. Me and you talked about it during the week. It was never going to be a straightforward win for England. They haven't played all that well in the championship, except for maybe in that France game. But at the same time, the way they were dominated by Ireland will be very worrying for Eddie Jones and the English rugby public. But also, I don't know if many people from Ireland or outside thought that Ireland had that type of performance in them.
Yeah, it's full credit to Ireland for dominating every facet of the game, from the set piece, the scrum battle they won, the breakdown. I thought Van der Fleer was unbelievable. As was Conan in the back row as well. And obviously, the big news around CJ Stander brought a lot of emotion about this Ireland team this week, with him retiring from rugby at the end of the season and going back to South Africa. So that would have had a part to play. But from England's perspective, our discipline was shocking again. The penalty count was hugely in Ireland's favour, so I think England gave about 15 penalties away in the game, which, you just can't live on the edge that way and expect to be competing and winning games. And we've seen that in the Six Nations. Wally made a point there about, England have gone backwards since the World Cup, and there's been absolutely no progress at all. Our game plan and our understanding of how to win Test matches has kind of disappeared as well with the performances. So yeah, massively disappointing. Some big questions will be asked by Eddie Jones, but this shouldn't really be about how poor England were. England were poor because Ireland made them look poor and performed exceptionally well. bringing back in Conor Murray and Sexton playing well. There's been a lot of question marks around those two in terms of their age and are they still good to go to the next World Cup? And they answered so many questions there today. Sexton's kicking game was on point in terms of tactically, as was Conor Murray's, and it was the perfect performance by Ireland and England. We've been left scratching our heads.
Yeah, absolutely. From Andy Farrell's point of view, my cat, obviously Paul O'Connell, David, like this was the performance that they needed taking over from Joe Schmidt. It's come, in the last game of their second Six Nations in charge, but this is the first time that we really saw what we've been hearing so much about on the evolution of the style of play, the way everything was about to click, and we weren't that far off. And today it kind of clicked, whereas most of us, in fairness, did have a kind of a skepticism as to whether we were getting anywhere at all.
Yeah, I agree with you. My first point was going to be, it's very hard to believe that when you don't see the evidence of it. It just sounds like talk, but they walked the walk today, and even Early's first try was a beautiful piece of play. But there was right throughout the game, there was some great action from Ireland. They didn't look predictable like they have done for many number of years now, really, even under Joe Smith. I was expecting to see that innovation under Mike Catt come through, and today was the first time we saw it, and it looked powerful, to be honest. There was times where Earlsey was coming in to play first receiver when say Sexton was on the ground, and again it was seamless. He was maybe hitting the guy the front pod rather than going behind, and there was good variation, but kept England guessing. But yeah, I thought we were just a hungrier team today, and that was the big difference for me. And I was quite surprised during the game when England were under the pump and there were things going against them. There was a fair amount of kind of smiling and joking and laughing, and after the game as well. Now you don't want fellas to become obviously be depressed after or whatever, but it's got to hurt a little bit. And I was kind of surprised that I think from an Irish point of view, I think the guys would have been hurting a lot more if it was the other way around. So you just wonder, maybe the psyche going into that game, that Ireland must have really, really wanted that a lot more than England.
Yeah, that's not what an English fan will want to hear, Andy, but on the evidence of what we saw. Yeah,
Wally speaks the truth. In the first half, they looked hungrier. They were winning the collisions. And you talk about the two tries in the first half and the actual fine details at international rugby. The skill of Conan when it's gone over the top, he's probably half an inch, quarter of an inch above Curry and taps the ball back to Earls on the perfect line. And they've obviously targeted the back of the line out where Billy Vunipola and Mako Vunipola were, where they're going to be slow into that hole. And they've put, tactically it was brilliant. An unbelievable bit of skill from Conan. England defensively, they're having to kind of protect George Ford, so they take Cowan Dickey out the line out to defend inside him, and every team has looked at this as a real opportunity to attack England. And that was the first try. The second try, then it had everything from an Ireland's perspective. They were taking on the gain line with some powerful carries. There's some good distribution out the back at times as well. Sexton's crossfield kick and Keenan with the unbelievable take above Elliot Daly. And then they keep the ball, spin it back to the left-hand side, some powerful pick and goes. And then for me, Conan, who's probably, I don't know whether he was man of the match, but he was fantastic in that first half to get the try. It just showed how confident Ireland were, and they were hungrier. They needed a performance just as England did, but it seems, Wally's right. It seemed like they wanted it a bit more.
There's a big difference when Ben Earl came on. You could see he was a guy who was hungry and who was putting himself about the place. And there's a big contrast between him and the other players who kind of looked like they're bored of the Six Nations. Who wanted it to be done. So I think probably freshening up that team is maybe needed a little bit. Maybe guys are a little bit too comfortable. You wouldn't know. But yeah, certainly I think from an Irish point of view, there was standout performances right throughout it. I think Henshaw actually got man of the match, but again, Conan coming in was phenomenal. I thought we might have been a little bit lightweight in the back row, but they totally dominated the English back row, which was joy from our point of view anyway.
I mean, that's your area of expertise, mate. And you look at the back row battle. Curry's been playing exceptionally well for us. In the Six Nations, in some poor performances, but Van der Fleer was unbelievable as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and then they just outworked him. I think you felt sorry for Curry because I think he seemed to be doing a lot of it on his own. And I think Billy Vunipola has always been a guy that England could hang their hat on and say, right, he'll get us 5-10 meters that that we shouldn't be getting. He'll just get us over that gain line. We can play off it then. But unfortunately, he hasn't been doing that for England. And he's not really doing it around the park. You saw Van der Fleer rip a ball off him in contact. A massive size difference there. That shouldn't be happening. And it comes down to concentration, comes down to want as well.
David, Andy's mentioned him a couple of times there, but Josh Van der Fleer is a player who never seems to get too many plaudits. He seems to never really be able to nail fully down a place, but is always there. He's playing 3 games of Six Nations for the last few years, and he's racking up the caps. But Will Connors has this brilliant performance, and we're looking at it was Dan Levy before him, it was various other players. But Van der Fleer, as Andy mentioned, is he's an incredibly consistently good open side, isn't he? He just does everything right, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's a massive engine and he's a massive work rate. And I suppose where he falls down is maybe he's really good at a lot of things, but there's, apart from work rate, he hasn't got the one thing. Like Conan is very good on the ball. He's got good footwork. He's great skills and is very much a link player, almost like another back, a much bigger one, of course. But Van der Fleer is going around. He's making a ton of tackles and he's competing and he's being a fly in the ointment of the opposition. But probably not a massive ball carrier and not a really destructive player, but is always there. So he kind of falls between the stools a little bit. When you think of someone like Will Connors, is a very good destructive player. But can carry a little bit as well, but really dominant in the tackles. But yeah, Van der Fleer, you do feel sorry for him because he is so good, but sometimes he's the guy you fills in a bit, so a little bit unfair. But maybe some of the other guys just have the other more physical aspects down a bit more.
Yeah. He's just someone that has to compete with 3 other top class guys at his club, never mind at his country. And
it's always been a really, really competitive area, So it's but what goes along with that is there's always chances. There's 3 positions, and there's always injuries in those positions.
Stephen Ferris has just dropped in a comment there. Wally just asking where your shoulder's gone. I think it's very unfair. I talk to Stevie every week. He spends all his time in golfing and in the gym, and he isn't allowed to play golf at the moment. So
he retired young anyway. He was just been in the gym since. My body is old and broken. He doesn't have the miles under him.
Just before we move off Ireland, then, as I do want to talk about Ireland, there's a couple of questions in about the Lions naturally, as well as there would be, given it's the end of the Six Nations in a Lions year. But the evolution kind of what we were waiting to see in attack. You mentioned Keith Earls playing at receiver. There was a couple of times in ahead of that try where I was thinking to myself, God, I can't remember last time I seen Keith Earls pass the ball. That's not his fault, And there was even a point where CJ Stander in the second half kind of just as he's about to take contact, lays it off. Not quite an offload, but before. And it's we haven't seen. Ireland have been so predictable. If Sander gets the ball, it means we're going into contact and then we're starting again, so on and so forth. And it just seemed like they varied up just even a few times over the course of the game. And it was obviously a conscious decision. One questions why it took so long, but at the same time, that's the way we want to see them play, isn't it?
No, 100%. Yeah. It was so frustrating watching Ireland play for a number of years. Now, at times they were winning, long periods they were winning, but when things, I suppose, were we weren't getting those successes, we weren't varying our game, and it was very frustrating because we were just so predictable. But today we played with tempo, and we were unpredictable in where the ball was going to go. Was going to hit, was it going to hit the pod up the front, or were they going to go behind, or was it going to be a pivot play or whatever? And it just, that variation keeps teams guessing. But also we carried with great impact, and it was a pity to lose David Kilcoyne early on. He's a great ball carrier, but Cian Healy, when he came on as well, had one of the biggest games I've seen from him in a long time. Carried really well as well, and likes of Furlong, obviously, who's a fantastic ball carrier. So yeah, we were. I think we had probably more ball carriers in our team today in some ways, and that helped as well. Helped the variation,
I think one of the people we haven't mentioned yet, who was world class as well, and as surely a shoo-in for the Lions now, is Tyke Byrne. He was absolutely everywhere. It was ridiculous. He won the battle with Maro Itoje. He was phenomenal at the breakdown, but also in disrupting mauls. His work rate is unbelievable. And
incredible.
You talk about that consistency across the whole team. That's what Ireland showed today. There wasn't a bad performance from anyone. They were all at their peak level. And, Ty Byrne and many of those Irish boys have played themselves. I was going to say onto the plane, but I don't think there'll be many planes on Lions tour. I think it'll be a bus somewhere. Maybe we'll fly over to Ireland for the and if that is going to transpire. But there's a lot of Ireland boys on that bus now, isn't there?
That's the question, isn't it? It's we might skip to that now. Like there's a question here from Jonathan Mulligan saying which Irish players have played their way onto the Lions tour. Robbie Henshaw has to be a certain starter. Have Sexton and Murray shown that they're playing? They're the best pairing at scrum half and fly half. I don't know. Maybe that's a separate question, but there is questions of Henshaw maybe was already a tour player. Is he looking as a test starter now after a performance like that? You play against the main competition in England, Andy, and you stand out, you win all those individual battles. It changes things massively for Warren Gatland, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And listen, Gats is pretty level-headed. You look at that England performance today, and you'd say there's a lot of boys that have played themselves out of contention. But he's going to put a squad together where you mentioned someone like Ty Byrne. He can play second row, back row. Henshaw has got experience. He can play inside and outside centre. But the fact is, you get on that Lions tour, you want to be a test player. And Henshaw, he hasn't played against Slade today, who would possibly be a like for like at 13, in terms of direct competition. We know about Jonathan Davis over in Wales as well, but Henshaw was at the top of his game today. His defensive reads, his physicality, ball in hand when he was, putting his foot down and going hard straight as well. He was phenomenal. So a number of players from Ireland have put their best foot forward, and the opposite goes for some of the England boys.
Yeah, if England did peak at the World Cup, which it remains to be seen, but there was definitely a mistake made not recognising that in 2005 after England won the World Cup, and you were on that tour, Wally. It's not necessarily that it was all England lads, but there definitely seemed to be a mindset with Clive Woodward of what his starting team was more than probably any other Lions tour. And you'd imagine Gatland with his experience won't make that mistake, but it does seem like there's definitely, if we name the Lions starting team in our heads last year, we're going to have a hell of a lot more English players than we do now.
Yeah, possibly. Thankfully, I was in Japan in 2005. I didn't make that.
Oh, sorry.
That was one to miss, I think. But yeah, I think you're right. There seemed to be two teams picked early days, and that is what I'm hearing, and what I've heard since, and that probably caused a lot of disquiet. There was the test team, and there was the other team, and they kind of didn't even really meet. They were kind of on separate tours almost, and sometimes. So yeah, look, those things are tricky to balance. You get a lot of tired players at the end of a tour who expect to be in the starting team, so it can be tricky. But yeah, look, I still think that there'll be a lot of English players putting their hands in for places. Because that was one game, and maybe they look at the Six Nations as a whole, but certainly from an Irish point of view, there's a lot of guys who've stuck their hand up, and I think we might see a fair few Welsh guys in it as well too, because they've certainly bucked the trend this year. You write them off at your peril, don't you, Wales, and it seems any year you think, well, look, it's not going to be a great year for Wales. They go on and either are competing or certainly win a Grand Slam. So yeah, there will be a fair few of those guys as well. I think who'll be putting their hands in. But yeah, look, I think that possibly there was a subtext today that we may be undervalued from an Irish point of view. That those places, and yeah, hopefully it does go ahead as well, because it's such a shame if players won't get a chance. Mightn't get this chance again through injury or through form or whatever. It comes around every 4 years, so really hope for the players' point of view that it does go ahead.
Two players, Andy, I wonder about your perspective on is Johnny Sexton and CJ Sander, right? Both obviously were on the last Lions tour. CJ, I think we're all thinking about it a little bit more now, given the announcement during the week. He'd obviously love to finish his career playing against South Africa for the Lions, but at least being a part of that tour. Do you think that he has a chance? And then I suppose the bigger question is Sexton, because to me, it's clear that Sexton is definitely at least one of the top 3 out halves in the British and Irish nations, but he is also the oldest player in the Six Nations, 35. And there might, it's not as if we're playing for another Lions tour or anything, but there is always that idea of, will we bring a 35-year-old out half? How does it look almost, but what would you do?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry how it looks to pick old players because, Sexton showed today, yes, he's the oldest player in the Six Nations, but he controlled that game at 10. And I was amazed. I read some stuff before the game and people were saying that this is a kind of shootout between George Ford and Johnny Sexton for the Lions tour. And George Ford shouldn't be anywhere near the picture. You've got the 2 10s that are your traditional game controlling 10s in Sexton and Farrell as options. And then you've got the razzmatazz of Finn Russell as well when you need to look at that. And obviously Dan Biggar is another option. So for me, the top 3, Farrell hasn't performed in the Six Nations really. Sexton has been a bit in and out. Obviously, I think he missed a game, didn't he? As well. But he's finished very strongly. We all know the quality Johnny Sexton's got. I cannot understand how people question him because, when you need him most of the time in the big games, he's there at the forefront and leading the charge. So I'd certainly be looking at Sexton as a major option. The questions that go around, do you want to go with Finn Russell and the magician that he is, and perhaps you give up a bit of the consistency and tactical ability to win a game and win a series. But Sexton is definitely in the conversation. I'd pick him myself. I think he's a fantastic leader. He brings the best out of players around him, and doesn't matter how old he is. I think myself and Wally played till about 42, so Sexton still can keep going.
I wish.
Is he for me, David? Even in the last 2 weeks now, I feel like his kicking has been phenomenal as well, which is never really talked about. We mentioned it last week how accurate he's been. He missed 1 kick in the entire tournament. I don't think many Irish out halves have scored 22 points against England in history like he did today. But also just like a few different things. He obviously always makes the Irish backline tick. Anything that we do generally comes through Sexton. But I thought that him bringing the ball to the line a little bit more today, it was huge in some of the stuff we were talking about earlier in how Ireland were able to be a little bit more dynamic and get a little bit more go forward ball.
Yeah, and it's not actually obviously the ground he's making or anything. It's just getting that defense to bite in on him, because if he's just distributing the whole time, defense won't honor his presence by holding down. They'll be making their mind up to drift out and tackle the guy he's going to pass it to. So him just taking the ball to the line, makes that defense second guess themselves and I suppose just honor his presence, I suppose, with a better way of putting it. But yeah, I thought he controlled the game excellently today. His passing was really slick. It was one of the things that surprised me with England. Their passing was poor today. But I thought Ireland's his passing and his distribution, his timing and his decision making of which pod to hit or go out the back or hit up, and then his little wraparounds, etc. And he made a couple of half breaks as well. So yeah, look, I thought he was excellent, and that, as I suppose, is a big part of his game. And when he's firing and he's in all cylinders. But look, I think a part of it as well was that he was getting great go forward ball. He's on the front foot. The pack were getting go forward ball, and they were giving go forward ball and putting it back on the plate for him. So nice tempo. That second try, there was a lot of faves that built up to that, and it was great tempo and great carries. Conan out wide, was eking out those yards, and a lot of other guys as well too, putting their hands up. So yeah, it was a very much a team display, but I thought Sexton was the puppeteer pulling all the strings and was very, very strong today.
I think the other one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Around CJ Stander, and obviously this is your area of expertise as well in the back row. Yes, he's retiring at the end of the year, but he's 30 years of age, and you saw him today. You look at that physical confrontation when he took the ball into contact, and Billy tried to smash him. Ellis Genge, I think, was in the tackle as well, and he just rode it. And then he
relished it, didn't he? He loved it. He was smiling, beaming after it. Yeah.
So you think with performances like that from him, he's definitely in the mix as well. There's some quality back rowers, and the balance of the back row is going to be key. You look at obviously Tipperick and Navidi and Falatau from Wales exceptionally well. Stander, sort of Van der Fleer today. He was brilliant. Conan was brilliant as well. But Hamish Watson up in Scotland.
And Fagerson as well, the number 8 there. He's really good. A young fella, like he's got a really powerful guy, and I'd say he's in with a great shot. But yeah, Hamish Watson as well is a joy to watch too. So it's going to be really competitive, that area, And if you add in the likes of a Tyke Byrne or a Toja who might be able to play in the back row, it's going to be interesting to see who they're going to bring. But it's going to be tough.
And it actually brings me to the point I was going to finish on. We'll talk about France and Wales, and which is starting in a half an hour in a couple of minutes. But there's kind of two questions: like, where do both teams go from here? Because Ireland can't just have this one-off brilliant win against England. They need to show that this is a starting point rather than an end point. And from England's point of view, I wonder, Andy, I suppose my question is, it's been a brilliant Six Nations. It's been a lot more entertaining than rugby in general in 2020, both before and after the lockdown. The All Nations Cup was turgid stuff, and it's been a really, really exciting Six Nations. But in a way, outside of the France game, it feels like that all suited England's style, but they haven't moved on possibly with the game. Is that too broad a statement?
No, not at all. I think a lot of pundits over here and a lot of journalists have been asking about the direction that England are going in and our attack. We haven't shown any attack really pre the France game last week since the World Cup final. We've got through games, winning games with our power game and our kicking territorial battle and forcing pressure on opposition and getting turnovers that way without really sparkling ball in hand. And we saw a bit last week against France. But yeah, I think this Six Nations has whet the appetite again for the competition, because you look at Ireland now, they're sat there on the end of the Six Nations with a brilliant win today, but there'll be a big tinge, I can imagine, of frustration for the two close losses that they had against France at home and Wales away, and what could have been. But yeah, England we haven't gone. I think we've gone backwards since the World Cup. He hasn't really regenerated the squad. There's players, and I know you guys over in Ireland perhaps don't watch the Premiership as closely as I do, but the likes of Marcus Smith, Sam Simmons, Alex Donbrant, 3 guys that are tearing up trees in the Premiership. Eddie Jones doesn't really value Premiership form. He doesn't speak to some of the Premiership directors of rugby. I know that for a fact. So this breakdown in communication between England and the clubs, and he picks the players that he feels suit his environment and not the players on form. And I think, unfortunately, when you do that, there's only so many times that you can keep picking players that aren't performing. And we've seen today at the end of the Six Nations that especially the guys that are playing at Saracens haven't played since November, apart from this Six Nations. So off the back of it, they've got no form, no real match intensity and match fitness, and you end up getting the results that we get now.
Makes a lot of sense, actually, because he did, that meritocracy is gone then, isn't it? So guys are feeling a little bit too comfortable in their jersey, in their position, and being in the squad, and you do need that pressure from guys coming out of the blue going, I'm going to take your place. And it looked a little bit like that to me today. It looked like, they had a good win against France, and that was their big game, and they weren't really mentally there today, So yeah, I think changing up those players a little bit and bringing in that Premiership form would be massive for England, because they've loads of strength and depth.
Yeah, there's a comment there from Owen about some of the players that you mentioned. There's another one that's just come in asking about Eddie Jones, and with what you said, how long will he stay in the post? Who will replace him? And it's a weird question for somebody who just 2 years ago got England to a World Cup final. But if there is that malaise and stagnant, and it's because he likes his group and doesn't want to have to go and build a new one. It does come a point, I think, with coaches like that, where you either have to go and have a full rebuild and start again and almost replace nearly every player and take a couple of years to do it, or you go. And we could be at that stage with Jones. It's a strange thing to say.
Yeah, there's no pressure on Eddie Jones in terms of his job. He signed up to the World Cup in 2023. There's no one is putting their hat in the ring that says, I want that job. Eddie Jones, England, the RFU, one, they probably can't afford to pay him off at the minute, so you stick with what you know. But there's no one really above him that's asking tough enough questions around what's going on within the camp, because everyone from the inside and the outside can surely see that our performances have gone backwards. And, there's a clamour for someone like Rob Baxter over at Exeter, to be England's coach in the future. He doesn't want the job at the minute because he's very comfortable in what he's doing at Exeter and what he's building there. And I think the change will come post-World Cup in 2023, unless we win it. And then Eddie Jones might try and stay around for another 4 years. But I spoke to an ex-teammate of yours, Wally, who I won't name this week, and he said to me, it's always been very hard to wish England well and support an England team. They made it even harder by putting Eddie Jones in charge. So it's one of those things that
we never needed any ammunition. Yeah,
but sure, he's great entertainment, lads. I mean, what would we do without him? You know what I mean? I don't know if we'd spend so long, even with you on the show, talking about England if Eddie Jones wasn't in charge. Andy, I have to say,
I think that's the character he is. You know, he likes all the plaudits. He doesn't like the tough questions. He does divide opinion. He's not going anywhere. I jokingly tweeted Eddie out today and Baxter in, but just to ruffle a few feathers. But we're with him, but he needs to be accountable as well. And that's the thing where I don't know whether there's any accountability above him to ask him questions about rugby and how we regenerate the squad and change our tactics, because he does rule with fear. And, you know, you see the turnover of coaches underneath him and, you know, his backroom staff as well. People don't last long in his environment, and players haven't lasted long when they've questioned him as well. So very autocratic, but you know, it's Eddie's way or the highway.
Fascinating stuff. Another, if Ireland go a little too well, David, in the next year or two, those tweets will be Eddie out, Farrell in. On my point earlier about it not being the end of something but the beginning of something, when you're with a team like that who ends, like Ireland have had great last days of the Six Nations before, but it does feel like that was the first time we've had a kind of a statement performance since the win over New Zealand, I would say, maybe in 2018, you know, and that everything looked to be ticking again in the way it was in 2018. How do we make sure that kind of kicks on to? There'll be no summer tour now, most likely, so it'll have to wait all the way till November before this team gets together again.
I think hopefully one of the things that strikes me that might have made a big difference, and you saw maybe the shoots of it against Scotland, was Paul and OConnell's inclusion in that coaching setup. You know, we dominated the Scottish line out, and even I think that the first try that came today, I think Paul had his hands on that, because he would have known, you know, obviously this is how they're defending at the tail. You know, you're going to have Curry rushing out, so there's going to be a big disconnect, and that connection between the analysis and the line out to, you know, your play is key. And Paul is forensic in terms of his analysis. Very, very smart guy, but also a really, really good guy to have in your camp in terms of creating an emotional and a psychological environment where, you know, you want to be dominant, and you want to I suppose be confident that you've done the work, but also go in with that kind of competitive and you know, almost gladiator type mentality. And Paul oozes that, and I think coaches will get great confidence from having Paul there in terms of the analysis and but also the players in terms of his energy and his will to win. It's infectious, and I think that may have been a big part of the last couple of weeks. You know, a little bit of a turning of maybe performances.
Yeah, well, we all hope it continues anyway, Andy. I'm sure more important things to be worrying about over the other side of the Irish Sea. But before we go, there's a pretty big game on in a half an hour between France and Wales. It's a possible championship decider. We have another game next Friday night to look forward to, where it'd be just like Scotland to probably go and win in Paris. But Wales are very, very big underdogs for this game. I think it's like 9 points or something like that, Andy. And, you know, at the start of the tournament, we mentioned Stephen Ferris earlier, I jokingly said to him that it'd be just like the worst Wales team that we've ever been talking about to go and win a Grand Slam, and they were 40-1. And it kind of would. And them going to Paris and doing it, you know, when nobody expects them to, despite winning their first 4 games, would be just like Wales as well. I don't know how they keep doing it, but every time we write them off, they come and have a season like this. Yeah,
definitely. I think, you know, obviously the change from Gatland post 2019 World Cup and Wayne Pivac taking over, there's always going to be a period of adjustment. You know, things have started to tick for them in terms of players coming back from injury for a lot of last season. Wayne Pivac didn't have the likes of Jonathan Davis, Ken Owens up front as well. And now they've got pretty much everyone fit and firing. Alan Wynne-Jones has found some phenomenal form. Of course he has. It's a Lions year. George North, the same. A Lions year has been shifted to 13. Their back line is actually really exciting when you look at the names on paper. Davis and North in the centre. Lewis Rees-Zammit plucked from playing Premiership rugby and being the quickest player on 2 feet, I'm going to say, in the Six Nations, if not the world. They're really, really, things have lined up nicely for them. So, the French, you go back to the game 2 years ago in the Six Nations when it was raining and France had a bit of a lead, and then Val Mahina throws a ridiculous long ball that George North intercepts. They go on to win it in the first game and end up with a grand slam. Can that happen again tonight? I don't think the France team are anywhere near as vulnerable as they have been to these brain explosions that we've seen previously. So it's going to be a hell of a game. The battle in the centres, looking at Vakatawa, he's going to be causing damage as well for them, and their ability. Jalibert at 10, people are expecting Unter Mac to just come straight back into the team, but Jalibert's been phenomenal, and they've got probably the world's best player at the minute in Dupont at 9. So I actually want Wales to win tonight. I want them to win the Grand Slam. I'm a quarter Welsh. I've not mentioned that before. But for as bad as England are, I'm going to claim.
What was the score today? Yeah.
We drew the second half. That's all I know about. You've won Cheltenham convincingly, and you've dominated us at the rugby today. So I haven't got any Irish in me except for a bit of red in my beard. But tonight I'm going to be Welsh and hope they win.
I'll take that. David, do you want another Wales Grand Slam? I don't know. As their natural rivals, almost. It's like this thing is like we can beat Wales, we can finish higher than them, but then they'll just win a Grand Slam every 3 years just to annoy us.
Yeah, I suppose. And you want Grand Slams to be really hard earned, don't you? And look, I suppose, as you say, they at the start of the competition, I think they probably weren't the team they are now with the likes of the players that have come back in. Jonathan Davis, Liam Williams, those kind of guys, and Navidi as well. So I mean, they are now, I suppose, a team that you would say is a much stronger Welsh team than the start of the campaign. But yet they were winning games at the start as well, even though it was against teams with red cards against them, and maybe a couple of dodgy tries allowed. But I think for me, I think I want to see France win. I'm actually a big fan of this latest French team, and we've seen French teams in the last 10 years that haven't been, I suppose, where we wanted them in terms of the overall Six Nations, and they really have some flair in their team, and I kind of want to see a French win because I think they will be the better team down there. But yeah, I think Wales with that momentum and going for a Grand Slam makes them very, very dangerous. And the Six Nations Grand Slam, they always perform. So it should be really, really interesting. 9 o'clock kickoff makes it harder though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I really appreciate that. We're ending the Six Nations on a surprising high from an Irish point of view, Andy. Apologies, but it changed things a little bit different. But there's a lot more rugby as well. We have a Pro 14 final next week for a start, but and all the domestic and European rugby to finish. But thanks a million to David Wallace and to Andy Goode for joining us today. That's all we have for this week, and indeed the season on the takeaway with Chicago Town. Thanks again to David and to Andy and to all guests we've had throughout the last 7 weeks. Thanks also to Chicago Town for being great sponsors and for being a great addition to our viewing experience throughout the Six Nations. Lots more rugby to come, as I mentioned, between now and the end of the season, starting next week, Pro 14 final. Who knows, maybe we'll be back for a few Lions tests later on this summer. Take care.